Author Raksha Vasudevan is a former foreign aid worker in Africa and a 2025 Whiting Nonfiction Grantee for her forthcoming book about her unforgettable experiences. I'm Erika Hayasaki, and welcome to the reported essay series, Writers Reading, where we discuss the authors who inspire our work. Raksha tells us how she decided to write her book, Empires Between Us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when I first started writing and reporting, I was actually very reluctant to write about my years in aid work and in Africa because, I think we're all aware of the abundance of narratives by Westerners, in the formerly colonized world and how problematic some of those can be.
Mhm.
And so I really wanted to avoid that.
Mhm.
But they just kind of kept haunting me and bothering me. And so I think I started off with, yeah, writing these kind of one-off pieces. I wrote a piece for Harper's Bazaar about the
Mhm.
history of Madras fabric and how it traveled to Africa during the slave trade and how it's kind of evolved since then with, many Africans and people of the Caribbean kind of reclaiming that cloth and integrating it into their own traditions or practices and even revolts against slavery and plantation labor. And so I think when I started writing these essays and uncovering these deeper histories, that's when I realized, okay, there's actually a lot more to my experiences than I realized at the time, right? Like there's all these histories of oppression, experimentation, of the colonial administration setting up different ethnic groups or racial groups to hate each other as part of their strategy of divide and rule. And so I think that's when I don't know, I don't have an exact date or even year, but I think that's when I still slowly start to realize, okay, there's a lot more to it, and I can write it in a way that's, um, I am still the narrator, and so it is, definitely centering me in a way, but it's also trying to take into account and illuminate a lot of these other aspects that I just haven't really seen done, except maybe in the work of writers like Saidiya Hartman.
Yeah, and I'm excited because we're going to talk about Saidiya Hartman as well. And one of my hopes with these talks is to introduce writers and to discuss writers and craft and the writers who inspire us and our work as well. And one of those books for you was Saidiya Hartman's Lose Your Mother.
It feels like one of those books that's just been in my life forever. Although obviously I think it was written in, I don't know, maybe 2018. I might be wrong about that. So it's not that old, but it feels like you can see from my very tattered and dog-eared copy, like I've returned to it so many times, but the memory of how I first came across it or even where I bought it is completely is completely gone.
Yeah, because it's pretty it's not a recent book. It's like uh it's been a while now. I'm forgetting
Yeah.
the year, but so it's been out for a while. And of course,
Oh, it
um
came out in 2007. Okay, it's actually
yeah.
so much older than I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while. And, I think a lot of people maybe in more recent years are familiar with like Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, which
Mhm.
is a book that I've brought into classrooms before. Um, but, it's funny how we all come into different writers and start to like call back to them when we're working on projects. And certainly there's a lot of similarities with Saidiya Hartman's work and what you're working on now. I noticed in like the Whiting, excerpt. There's a very short excerpt, and I don't know if that'll even still be in the book because I know it's a work in progress. But even that moment, you write about a moment with a young boy who had lost his leg, right? And there's taking a photograph, I think, or talking to him and asking if he, you can share his story or write down his story, and then you kind of walk yourself through the ethics of that. What is that scene about? And maybe
Yeah.
you can tell us a little about that one.
Yeah, so that scene is from a chapter that's currently early, like fairly early on in the book, like chapter 2 or 3, I think.
Hmm.
And I started off my career in West Africa in Mali, and my job, and at the time, Mali was experiencing a civil war, but it was uh, well, it was kind of on and off, and it was mostly in the Mali's a huge country, and it was mostly in the north, and I was mostly living and working in Bamako. So it felt, I certainly wasn't, dodging missiles or anything like that. I had a pretty cushy life, actually.
Yeah.
Um, but my job was to, and sorry, the nonprofit that I was working for, they basically did these public health campaigns to educate civilians and the general public about mines and other, grenades and other explosive remnants of war that remain in the aftermath of war, undetonated many times, and that
Mhm.
cause a lot of injuries and deaths even after the fighting is over. I mean, it's a huge problem right now and will be a huge problem probably for decades to come in Gaza,
Mhm.
because there's just so many weapons that have been funneled there and haven't detonated. So it's a problem you often see in sort of the aftermath of war. And so the nonprofit I was working for was doing these public health campaigns, and my job was to basically write these donor reports about what we were doing and the lives we were saving, the impact we were having, et cetera. And part of that meant going to some of these sites where the conflict had happened and explosive remnants of war had remained, and talking to people there, photographing them, um, to say, like, to basically convey to donors, this is a real thing that's happening. This is why you should give your money to us so we can prevent
Mm.
more accidents and more suffering. And so in that little excerpt that you read, my me and my colleagues had traveled to the region of Timbuktu in northern Mali, which was, sort of the epicenter of the war. And we had met this young boy who had lost a leg, because he, picked up something that he just thought was a toy or a ball, and then it exploded, which
Mhm.
that's often what happens with kids. Um, and so he lost a leg. And so in that little excerpt, basically, I'm kind of asking him for permission to photograph him, and I'm going to use this photograph in my donor reports.
Mhm.
And then he seems to give me his permission, although it's not totally clear. I take the
Mhm.
photo and then I show it to him, and he has a very visible emotional reaction to
Mhm.
seeing himself. And so in that scene, I'm kind of thinking about why I didn't really have a chance to sort of ask him about it, but I'm thinking about, why he had that emotional reaction and what it means for the kind of work I'm doing and whether it's really ethical. I mean, is it ethical to capture people in their moments of suffering
Mhm.
and pain in order to, extract money and sympathy from Western donors? And is that really the kind of work that I want to be doing, even though I think, the public health education is obviously valuable. So a lot
Yeah.
of the book is about yeah, kind of weighing the ethics and morals and the pros and cons of this sort of very problematic or very um, complex type of helping, quote unquote.
Yeah. And so through much of your journey and as we're following you, you're also stepping back and grappling with those
Yeah.
ethical questions, the bigger systemic questions, the issues within that. And it sounds like so you're having like a journey of thinking about your own role in this and then the larger system. And so
Mhm.
you have to balance both of those in your book. Is that the idea of, as you're going through in the narrative?
Yeah, and then you don't, it doesn't really come across in that scene, but as the narrative continues, there are also scenes where my particular identity, racial, gender, all of that and the identities of the people I'm interacting with really comes to light and takes on new meaning, and you kind of see, or I try to help the reader see um, why those identities hold the weight they do in the aftermath of empire, and why I'm even why is there a situation at all where a French NGO is responsible for doing public health education in Mali, and obviously
Mhm.
France was the former colonizer. You
Mhm.
can imagine there are some ties.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a lot of what the book is grappling with.
Yeah. And I know like you came into writing, you already had this whole life, this career, and at the time were you already thinking about writing? Were you
Mhm.
journaling? Um, Tell us a little bit about how you shifted into, of course you ended up doing the freelance work and writing as a journalist, which comes with its own ethical
Sure, yeah.
issues, right? And so, how did you make that transition, or were you always in that in-between space?
Yeah, I think when I was in Africa, I had friends who were writers. Like one of my closest friends, who's also a character in this book, is a Ugandan writer and poet. But I was also friends with or knew many foreign correspondents.
Hmm.
For Al Jazeera or Voice of America. And so I think, and I was actually, while I was in Uganda, I was taking like some writing workshops and writing classes. So it was sort of a burgeoning interest at the time, but
Yeah.
I didn't really, I didn't know any writers growing up. I didn't think of writing as or journalism as a career. That was just never
Yeah.
in my universe of possibilities. So I guess it was a hobby for a long time. And yeah, I was journaling. I think I published maybe like a couple of essays here and there. Um, but it was really being surrounded by other people who were actually doing this work for a living that made it seem possible. And
Mhm.
I think, speaking to the other journalists, especially, I realized that I was already doing some of the work that they were doing. Like, my in East Africa, most of my jobs involved doing a lot of research for NGOs or donors. So, you know, let's say um, let's say some NGO wanted to set up a project on agriculture or food security in Western Uganda.
Mhm.
My firm would be hired to go to Western Uganda, talk to farmers, seed suppliers, distributors, etc., to figure out like the barriers in the system, what's preventing them from producing more, making more money.
Mhm.
And so a lot of my work was doing interviews, and doing focus groups and sometimes surveys. And so and that was the part of my job I really enjoyed.
Mhm.
The part that I didn't enjoy was that most of, sort of the format of the output, it would all end up in this like very dry report that I found that usually kind of forced you to be overly simplistic and reductive.
Mhm.
And that ended up in the shelf or the inbox of, some donor NGO that, who knows if they even read.
Yeah.
And so that really frustrated me. And I kind of wanted to do what my journalist friends were doing. I wanted to be able to tell like individual stories without necessarily promising them that things were going to change or
Right.
get better.
Yeah.
And just sharing their stories with the wider world. So I stayed in aid until 2018, and then, even once I sort of quit my last full-time job in aid, I was still doing a bunch of consulting work while I was trying to get, my start in freelancing just for financial reasons. And, I haven't had to do that in a while now. But who knows, with the state of the
Freelancing.
industry, like, although now obviously the state of foreign aid isn't great either.
Yes.
But at the time it did allow me to sort of transition into journalism and still have a bit of a cushion.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. So you were surrounded by writers and journalists, and that alone was like a kind of teaching moment. You could see that people do this for a living, and there is a way, and there is a pathway. But also that idea that you said you wanted to tell stories without promising that, things were going to change. And you might think that sometimes people go into storytelling and they do it because they want that
Mm.
end. They want to be able to make those at least give some hope that things could change after the stories. But what is it about the storytelling that drew you to this form?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably what draws all journalists to this forum, like we're nosy people, right? Like we just want to know.
Yeah.
We just want to know about people's lives and what makes them tick and to get to spend time with them. I think the other frustration I really had with aid work is that, I would sometimes do these 1 or 2 hour long interviews and then it was time to move on. I would probably never see the person I was interviewing
Yeah.
again. And, that always felt frustrating to me because you can tell when you have an interesting subject who obviously wants to talk to you, which is not always the case, that there's so much more that has shaped their lives. And I think journalism and writing does also, especially in long form or magazine writing, does also allow you um, to build context around the subjects' lives, right?
Mhm.
Like that, often it felt like in aid work, in the research I was doing, I was presenting these people's lives and realities as if they happened in a vacuum, as if, Uganda had
Mhm.
never been colonized and
Right.
or as if they were all like one sort of monolithic mass, and
Right.
that's obviously not true. And so I think, it's harder to do um, perhaps with breaking news, but what I love about long form is that you can get into these nuances. You can kind of unsettle stereotypes of how a person is supposed to behave um, or how you might expect a community to react to certain events. And I want to develop relationships with people that obviously journalism is extractive in many ways, but I have also found that um it's less so than other
Hmm.
um careers. I still have
Yeah.
I still I'm still in touch with some of the subjects of
Yeah.
my former some of my previous stories. And I think that's because it allows you to be really clear from the get-go, like, you're not allowed to pay your subjects anything.
Yeah.
Obviously, that itself is debatable. Nothing might change.
Yeah.
And I might not even end up using your story,
Yeah. It might
And I
not
think
even get published,
exactly, I might even get it published. And I think that is actually really healthy.
Yeah.
That makes it feel less extractive to
Hmm.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I also appreciate your points about the context that you can offer, when you're telling a story and then putting it in that historical context or conveying those nuances and those things that are not so neatly packaged when it's something that's maybe a little more communications oriented, at least,
Mm.
with an end goal.
Yeah.
And I think, going back to Saidiya Hartman's book, Lose Your Mother, I feel like we get a lot of that through how she's navigating the world and even presenting herself as a character within it.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, like, what was it about her work and
Mm.
this book that really started to stick with you as you have read it? over the years and noted it and,
Yeah.
used it as inspiration as well.
Yeah, so many things. I mean, first, I think, she is a trained historian, but her writing is the opposite of dry. It's
Yeah.
very intimate. I guess you could describe it as voicey. And she writes in this sort of tone or register of grief, I think, throughout, but the book itself is not depressing, I don't think, or at least not as a whole.
Hmm.
So I think the type of nonfiction that I love and that I hope to emulate is written in that sort of intimate register.
Yeah.
That even if you're not a history nerd, you just want to follow this voice
Yeah.
wherever she goes. So I think that's part of it. I think also she's very, very explicit about her own sort of shortcomings,
Good.
failures, missteps as an outsider, right? Like that's kind of how she opens the book is
Yeah.
some of these accounts of how she is perceived and how she kind of, misinterprets certain situations. And I love that. I think that's the kind of um, I don't like the term travel writing, but that's the kind
Mhm.
of writing I really appreciate from outsiders to the place. Like it makes me trust her
Yeah.
almost instantly. And I mean, I related to a lot of it. I was constantly screwing up, and not understanding the context. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, when I was there. And then plus it's also just it's very her blending of personal narrative and historical research is like it's very rigorous, but it's also seamless. She can use any scene, of riding in a taxi or a bus or visiting a village that is very like visceral and sensory, um, and
Hmm.
use that to drop you into like, you know, these archives or this, you know, very dry, research that would be very dry in other hands.
Yeah, I totally agree when I was reading it. And like I said, you recommended this book to me because I had read Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, and I always was in such admiration for and you also gave it the term critical fabulation, right? Which is her term,
Mhm.
which I was always referring to as speculation. So Saidiya Hartman does this technique where she will take a photograph from something from the archives and specifically archives where, voices have been left out, omitted, or, captured, written about by people who are, either the white enslavers or white historians or sociologists who, were not interested in the inner lives of like people who were enslaved or women, Black women in history. And then she will kind of cross that boundary and speculate about what the lives were like. And that was something that she does a lot in that book. But she also does it in this book a bit.
Mhm.
You mentioned how did you start to learn about that form, or was that new to you? Because it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it was new to me. I think this was my introduction to
Yeah.
it. And I think it's really hard to do well.
Yes. Not for
Because
everybody.
no, not for everybody, not for beginners. Um, but I think she handles it beautifully, and it's really obviously justified in the case of Lose Your Mother because there is such a huge gap in the archives, right,
Yeah.
um of the lives of the enslaved, and the lives of also those who helped enslave them, including Africans. And
Mhm.
so I think, in a way, the whole book is her trying to fill in these gaps, going to
Right.
Ghana, living there, traveling around the country, trying to fill in these gaps, but that doesn't necessarily solve her problem, right? Like she doesn't
Yeah.
I don't think it's giving anything away to say she doesn't find the answers she's expecting. And so, one of the things that I also really I really respect and have tried to learn um, from this book is sort of the silences,
Hmm.
this idea of the silences saying as much as words. And so, in her encounters in this book, people don't necessarily want to talk about the past, especially when it's painful,
Yeah.
or especially when they themselves are implicated in harm.
Hmm.
And so this method of critical fabulation that she uses is maybe the only way to fill in those silences,
Hmm.
and to, recreate and honor the, the lives of people we really don't know much about, people sort of erased by history.
Hmm.
But it still doesn't solve all her problems. I mean, she doesn't, you
Yeah.
know, yeah, she doesn't,
No.
it's not a, it should, she doesn't, it doesn't provide maybe the revelations that you might expect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the idea of critical fabulation, like you will have something in the archives, and then Saidiya Hartman, will be perhaps presenting the
Mhm.
photograph, the moment, the historical research.
Mhm.
And then it's almost as if a shift happens in the language, and now we're in the inner life of
Mhm.
somebody from the archives in a way that we would never have access to that because there were no records kept because so much was left out, and he names all of these
Mhm.
details that we would want in a fictional account are not there. So
Mhm.
she basically moves into a fictional account, but kind of signaling that this is what we're doing now. And then it feels like we accept it because, we know what's going on here and we know why she's doing it, which is really
Mhm.
interesting. But I agree, it's not I wouldn't want to see it in everybody's work,
Yeah.
but I see the power of when she does it
Mhm.
in her own work. And I don't know, is that something that you've thought about too?
I think again, it's really tricky as an outsider. You don't want
Yeah,
to like I am hesitant to speculate on the inner lives of someone with less power than me, with a totally different life. And I'm not a historian. I think
yeah.
the power of Hartman's work is that she is a historian. You do have a lot of trust in her,
Hmm.
um, both because of, her writing, but also her credentials.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think you can feel, or I feel confident, like she combed the archives. She went through everything there is, and the critical fabulation is almost a last resort.
Yeah,
Whereas for me, and I think most writers or journalists, um, the archives or historical research they've yielded a lot for
yeah.
me, for my specific purposes.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't necessarily need to draw on critical fabulation. I'll leave that to the to the
To the
experts like
experts,
Hartman.
yeah. Yeah, if you can find that inner life
Yeah.
in your reporting, then certainly that's what you would want to do.
Mhm.
And then I think if there's an example of this book, I think the writer's Joanna Adorjan. Um it's a memoir where she investigates the suicide of her grandparents, but of course she couldn't have been there when her grandparents committed suicide. So she does a similar thing. She doesn't. I don't
Mhm.
think she calls it critical fabulation, but she just has a moment where if she would imagine this is how it happened, and then suddenly she's reconstructing the
Mhm.
day that they took their own lives and putting it in
Mhm.
this also historical context. So it's an interesting technique, but I can also see how it would be challenging. But the use of speculation is
Mhm.
something that we use a lot as writers because we can't know everything.
Right.
But also what you're saying just about using yourself, and the way Hartman does that, there's moments throughout where she's talks about, I keep fumbling, like I'm a stranger.
Mm.
She's showing, I mean, there's even a moment on the first day early in the book where she thinks that there's a coup
Right.
and,
Yeah.
she's hiding and she
Yeah.
like pees on her leg. She's really, very, candid about this situation. It was the middle of the night. She was there and you're almost scared for her, and then come to find out it was nothing. It was like it was like a fire, and she had
Yeah.
like created all of this in her mind, and the people that she was staying with are just like silly American, like what's wrong with you? And she's kind of moving through the world like that,
Mhm.
constantly making missteps and all of that. And but for you, that makes her like a more trusted narrator, right? And do you do
Yeah.
a little of that too? Like
Oh, I
just
do a
being
lot of
honest?
that. Yeah, the book
Yeah.
is filled with my missteps and my misunderstandings. And I think I think just of course you would expect an outsider to fumble, right?
Yeah.
Like it would be totally unrealistic if they didn't. And that can be in big ways or small ways. Um, and so it makes me trust her, and it certainly, reminded me of a lot of my experiences. But I think, for me, it's really important to show sort of my range of missteps and misunderstandings
Mhm.
because, um, part of my argument or thesis is that this is the effect of empire, right? Like it cuts you off from history, from context, from understanding um the landscapes and the people around you. I mean, certainly I don't think either of us were taught,
Right.
African history or South
Right.
Asian history in school.
Mm.
And so uh and even in schools in Africa, like African history is rarely taught. And so it's kind of this common, almost like sanitizing effect of empire is that I was completely unaware of all the ways that I was connected to Africa
Mhm.
before even before I stepped foot on the continent. And so I need to show myself kind of screwing up.
Yeah.
And the consequences of those screw ups um, in order to advance my thesis.
Yeah. And then how does it feel to write that? To write about your screw ups and,
Yeah,
the things that you don't know or when you look,
yeah. It doesn't feel bad. It really
Yeah.
doesn't. Like it just feels honest, and it
Yeah.
feels, I mean, similar to how, this idea of like we forget the compliments that people paid us, but we always remember the insults or we always
Yeah.
remember our own screw ups. Like my memories of my screw ups are some of the most vivid
Sure, sure.
and not even necessarily my screw ups, but just how I was misunderstanding a situation until something happens that startles me into recognition.
Mm,
Those are some of my most like vivid memories, and I think they lead to epiphanies, for lack of a better term, much later on. Like they're really important narrative device for me.
yeah. The use of yourself too, in in Lose Your Mother,
Mm,
there are moments where we're with Saidiya and her mother, and like
mm,
where she's pulled over in the cars. Really, it really sticks out because they're pulled over by a white police officer, and a young Saidiya Hartman's yelling at the officer, and
oh yeah.
very, very blunt as a child, and she'll intersperse those moments like along her trip in Ghana with us,
Mhm,
you know.
mhm,
It's like little flashbacks that she gives us, these moments of her life, these moments where, she was questioning her own identity, her name,
mhm.
even her given name by her parents, changing her name. Um, and I wonder, like, how have you navigated how much of yourself to put
Yeah.
in and when does it like pull away? I think that's one of the most challenging parts of this kind of work when it's
Mhm.
the reported memoir or the braided kind of piece. How much is too much of the self because
Yeah.
it's necessary. How do you navigate that yourself?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be the biggest challenge, or it
Yeah.
is the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges for me. And we didn't talk about this earlier, but actually my family, my parents specifically, they're also part of this book
Yeah.
because, and my upbringing is part of this book, maybe more so than Hartman's, because part of my argument is that, empire and its aftermath doesn't just show up in, our interactions with strangers in faraway lands. It
Yeah.
shows up in like our very intimate relationships at home. And so part in and they weren't originally when I started writing this book, for the reasons you just mentioned, I was reluctant to center myself and my own story
Mhm.
more than necessary. So they weren't really part of this book when I started thinking about it. But, as I did this research and reporting, it just became increasingly obvious, um, in very blatant ways, like how much the aftermath of empire, um, very recent aftermath, because my grandparents were born when India was still a colony,
Yeah.
um, and how that aftermath, how much it shaped my parents, and in turn, how much it shaped me and my relationships with them. So they're also a part of the
Yeah.
story, and it's really hard. Like I, um, I, again, I'm so wary of narratives that center outsiders in their own personal story um, in a place that's not their home.
Mhm.
Um, and the sort of, navel gazing critique that comes along with it. But I also think it's really important to show, how it shows up in my own personal life in these deeply intimate ways. And
Mhm.
hopefully that will be of interest to readers too. But yeah, I mean, I think that's where I'll be seeking that's where I'll be seeking feedback from a lot of people is, and especially like um, my friends and peers in Africa is, what is actually important to the story that I'm telling and what just feels kind of
Yeah.
extraneous or too much. And I'm really relying on others to kind of
Yeah.
guide me because I'm just guessing.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to write and then you can always scale back, right? And so it's
Yeah.
like you have to, part of the process of writing is writing, and finding your way and then shaping and going back and scaling or rearranging later. And so but it's all, I think it's so important that you're also just thinking about all these things, all of the complications and, the ways that it can go wrong and the ways that you're also needed because actually I think a lot of readers would say, most readers would want that connection to the narrator. Like we want to understand why you're here. Just like with Saidiya. I mean, Saidiya Hartman, she is that narrator who's there, feels out of place, kind of as a stand-in for a lot of people who would,
Mhm.
we can feel ourselves in her, at least in her perspective.
Yeah.
And then that there's that connection that then we
Mhm.
will go through these historical moments, which can be some of them can be quite painful and difficult to
Yeah.
read
Right.
history. And but we're there with her, and she's like we trust her taking us along. So
Mhm.
it is needed, but yeah, I can absolutely relate to how difficult the balance of it is. So you have readers that you have trusted readers, which I think every writer should have.
Mhm.
The group that is just going to be honest with you
Yeah.
and support you, lift you up, but also let you know when it's going off in a direction. How do you find how have you found those readers just throughout your life, people you trust, writers and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, one, as I mentioned, is a close friend from when I was living in Uganda, and who's a writer herself, and we've actually collaborated on a couple of projects before, and I just respect her so much, and
Yeah.
um, so she's one. Another one is like an editor I've worked with in the past who edits a magazine that I've written for before. Another couple are just, are people I don't think I've met in real life, or actually a couple, one of them I have met in real life, but just writers whose work I really admired um, and just message them to say like thank you
Wow.
for writing this book. And we kind of kept up a correspondence and a
Yeah.
relationship, and now I've read some of their manuscripts, they've read some of mine. Um, yeah, another is a former teacher of mine at a writing workshop who I've just kept up a relationship with. So I think it is hard. I mean, I'm really glad that I didn't write this book earlier for a couple of
Mhm.
reasons. One, because I just don't think I had the skills to do it. I'm still not even sure I have the skills to do it.
Well, we all
But
feel like that when
yeah,
we're in it. Yeah, so
yeah,
bear with me.
totally. But also because I don't think I necessarily had the right readers,
Mhm.
2 or 3 or 4 years ago. Like I think
Mhm.
now I have a really clear idea of who I want to read, when I want them to read, what kind of feedback I'm going to be asking them for. And that's something you don't think about, right? When you write a book proposal is
Right.
who is going to really support you on this journey.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And finding those people who are the right readers. Uh,
Yeah.
that's another, yeah, aspect of it. It can't just be anybody, but they
Right.
have to kind of get what you're doing as well.
Hmm.
Um, you, I know you've talked a little bit about freelancing your way through a book project too. I mean, you
Hmm.
have a book contract, you now have a Whiting award, but before that, you were writing for Harper's Bazaar and like different places that some of the essays in this book, or maybe some of the work is
Yeah.
at least informing the book.
Hmm.
Um, so uh, is that a method that I mean, I do that, I'll be
Yeah.
working on a long, big book project or something, or a project, and I'll go somewhere and I'll do multiple
Mm.
stories in that region because I know I'll be there. But
Yeah.
how did you start to do that before you know, you came along this far, I guess?
Yeah, I wish I'd been more strategic about it. I really wasn't. And I know writers and journalists who do exactly what you're describing, kind of use the opportunity and the funds
Hmm.
uh, from freelancing, from specific reporting trips or assignments to build out a larger book. And
Yeah,
I didn't I didn't really do that. I was kind of um I was just writing about what interested me at the time, and it wasn't
yeah,
always focused on, I also have written a lot for High Country News, which is focused on the American West. So
right.
I was really just writing about whatever interested me in sort of a haphazard way.
Yeah,
And I hope for my next book that I'll be more strategic about it. But that said, I think writing about what interested me, as we talked about earlier, is what helped me figure out, oh, there's p perhaps a book in this, and I can
yeah,
use some of the material from, my earlier essays or pieces in, I mean, some of them have basically gone directly into the book.
yeah,
So that it did work out in that sense. And I think also um, working on the book now has allowed me to discover ideas for potential standalone pieces, like things that I know aren't going to fit in the book,
mhm,
but that could make, great magazine articles or essays that I think some of them maybe I can pitch now, and others maybe I'll wait until, the book is closer to publication.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so I guess I don't really have it. I'm not the person to ask for advice other than
Yeah.
just to
No,
say
I
like
think
follow
that is
your
good
interests.
advice. I
Yeah.
mean, I think what's smart about that is sometimes people think they just have the book proposal and they sell the proposal, but actually a lot of people I know, they've published pieces that have then, you know, at least been part of the proposal or helped them sell a proposal or help them start to think about, actually, I have a lot
Yeah.
of things to say about this and this could be a book. Like there was a lot of, response to this essay and
Yeah.
yeah, and then of course on the other side of it, once you are doing a book, yeah, you have so many things that you're researching that maybe won't make it in the book, but then when the book comes out, you have all these essays you can publish around the book coming out too that are
Mhm.
maybe a little bit related. So it all can work together, but you have to think about it, the big picture sometimes.
Yeah, galaxy brain, which I
Yeah,
don't
and
have.
we're so in the weeds of trying to do the
Exactly.
work.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah, I mean, so how far along are you now with the project? Are you?
Yeah. I mean, it feels like I should be further along because I've been thinking about the book for so long.
Sure. How long have you been thinking about the book?
I think I started thinking about the book in with a very different lens, like early on in the pandemic, like maybe 2021 or
Mhm.
2022. But it was a very different book. I won't go into
Mhm.
all the um, all the differences, but I first started thinking about it in 2022. So now it's, yeah, 4 years later. And so basically earlier this month, I finished like a full first draft. And I have to keep reminding
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you.
How long
I
is a
think,
full first draft? Like 100,000 for you or
yeah, I think
75,000?
mine is a little bloated. I think it's 120,000. So I'll
Yeah,
definitely have to scale back.
that's amazing
Uh,
though, to have written
Yeah,
120,000.
yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I mean, the quantity is nice, but the quality, I can't really say at this point. I just got to a point, at the end of March where I just couldn't look at it anymore. So I've sent it to a friend and trusted reader to read.
Yeah,
She's reading it this month, and I should have her feedback, in a week or so. And then it's due to my editors in the summer,
yeah,
July.
great.
So, and then I mean, this is my first book. I don't really know how many rounds of revisions and edits will
Yeah,
happen, how long that will all take.
yeah. But the good part of having the 120,000, even if it doesn't end up being 120, is that when you
Yeah.
go back, you have material to work with. It's not a blank page.
Yeah.
So, you can rearrange, cut, and all of that, but it's like somehow less scary than staring at the blank page and knowing you have to, get there at some point.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then in terms of like how you sold the book, like
Mhm.
how did that come about? Was it off of an article or, everybody's always so
Oh,
curious how that comes together for people.
oh, it was such a saga. Actually, I wrote, maybe I'll send this to you. I wrote a Substack
Oh
post on
yeah.
it, like a
Okay.
long one,
Yeah, and everybody needs
because
to follow your Substack. It's so good. Then there's so many other things just about freelancing and writing magazine articles and traveling and everything that are really helpful for writers.
yeah, and I think, with this particular post, I wanted to be really transparent on how difficult it was not just to sell the book, but also to really figure out my vision for it. I mean, when
Yeah.
we're talking, I hopefully was like pretty coherent about what I'm trying to do with the
Yeah,
book, but
definitely.
it definitely wasn't the case a couple of years ago. And I think that is really part of the struggle, is figuring out what you really want to do with the book.
Right.
And I didn't sell it until I was able to articulate for myself what I really wanted to do. But yeah,
Mm.
I went through several agents. I went through several rounds of submission. Like there were so many times when I almost just gave up on the book altogether. But
Wow.
yeah, I think there was just something inside of me that wouldn't shut up and wouldn't let me just, throw it into the recycle bin. Um, and it worked out, and I'm really grateful for that. But yeah, I'll send you the link.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's always so good for people to know too. And you said you went through not just different editors, but agents. That's a process, just
Yeah,
finding an agent you connect with. And then going
totally.
through the various rounds of submissions, which for writers, that means, your agent's then sending it to a bunch of people, then
Right.
you get a bunch of rejections and maybe somebody's interested and maybe you have a conversation over here or maybe it's all rejections and then you go on to the second round. So it's a whole long drawn out
Yeah.
process that in the end all you need is one yes, but it can feel like torture as you're going through it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that whole idea of the one yes it's not true, because, you can have an editor who loves your book, but they
Right.
need to get the buy-in of their whole team. So actually you
Totally.
need like 10 yeses or whatever.
That's such a
So,
good point. Yeah.
yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I learned a lot along the way, and I'm so glad. I was just thinking about this yesterday. Like, I know humans have a tendency to rationalize whatever happens to them, but I am truly so glad that it worked out the way it did, painful as it was, because I do feel like, yeah, I'm writing the book that I really want to write, that I really want to read. I'm working with the editors and agents that I who I feel like truly get this book and what I'm trying to do with it. Um, and so, I guess I mean, even though the book isn't out yet, like it does have a happy ending.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can really just feel devastating when you're going through it.
Yeah, but it's such a great point. You're right, because you will have editors that like it and then it's marketing and things like that. They're
Yeah.
worried that they don't like it. So to get there and to get to the point where you have an editor that you love working with. And journalism too hasn't, it seems like becoming a journalist along the way. I mean, you've become a journalist along the way as you're thinking about this book. How
Mhm.
has that informed how you're also thinking about writing a book and
Mhm.
you know, being in this world of media and also book publishing
Yeah.
now?
Well, like I'm not a historian. I think in some ways it would be more useful for the book if I was one, but I do really, somewhat similar to what Saidiya Hartman does, like I do really try to bring in a lot of research, probably some readers will say too much, a lot of research, but also um, both like from the archives or historical records, but also like on the ground reporting. I got before the Whiting, actually, I got another grant to travel back to Africa for a month last year when I did a lot of reporting for the book.
Hmm.
And I'm just so grateful to be a journalist and to have acquired some of the skills of journalism because I don't think I would have been able to write the book without this, or it would have been a totally different book. I think the everything from like thinking about the structure of the book um, to how I depict certain characters and myself
Hmm.
um, and places has been informed by journalism, and I use a lot of work by other journalists from the continent in the book too. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, I really I don't have any formal training as a journalist, but I do think like working with editors and just going out and reporting has made me such a better and different writer.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of media, well, I in and publishing, I mean, I do miss reporting. I think that I really do, and I'm really um, excited for I'm grateful for the time I have to focus on the book, but I'm also excited for when I'm at a stage where I can start reporting and pitching again
Yeah.
because yeah, I miss it and there's a lot happening both domestically and abroad that needs coverage, and I know journalism and journalism is in a precarious state, but I think there are also lots of new publications that give me hope. Um yeah.
Yeah. No, it's good. And you're right, like the book process is one process, but there is something just about being in the mix of publishing. It's a
Mm.
good like rhythm to have to get into, and then sometimes you are out of it, but you
Yeah,
miss it because there's like it doesn't take 5 years to write a story all the time.
hopefully.
And you can still dip
Yeah.
into these really important issues and worlds and talk about them.
Yeah.
What before we like wrap up, are there other books? I mean, I
Mm.
think everybody should absolutely read Lose Your Mother as well as Lydia's other work.
Yeah.
But if they're interested in, yeah, particularly that idea of braiding yourself into a
Mm.
story that's a reported
Yeah.
historical kind of narrative. Um, Saidiya Hartman's book, Lose Your Mother, is a great example. Are
Yeah.
there any others that have served as maybe structural models or just inspirational models with
Yeah.
craft or writing?
Yeah, a few. So there's let's see, I think I have some right here. These are my inspiration shelves.
Yes, I
These
love. I see some of the, we have some of the same books. I can see a
Yeah,
few of them.
sure. There's one other. Oh yeah, okay. Maybe these four. So one is called Notes on a Foreign Country by
Mm,
Susie Hansen.
okay.
and the subtitle is An American Abroad in a Post-American World. So Susie
Mm,
is an amazing journalist. She has written a lot for the New York Times Magazine and also New York Magazine, and she lived in Turkey for almost a decade. So most of her reporting is from there and from
mm,
around the Middle East. And so this book is, yeah, again, a blend of memoir and reporting about moving to Turkey, as a young 20-something American journalist.
mm.
And it's sort of a coming of age, but in the sense of realizing what it means to be an American in the larger world and how America has deeply shaped these regions
Mm.
that Americans don't really think about.
Yeah.
So that's a great book, and she actually has a new book coming out, I think, like next week,
Hmm.
also about Turkey, which I think will
Oh,
be
nice.
a great read. Um, this other one called Stringer by Anjan Sundaram, who
Okay.
is also a journalist. And this is about his year working as a stringer. I think it was for the AP. It's not totally clear in the book. Or I don't, it is clear actually, I just don't remember.
Mm.
As a stringer in the Congo. And again, it's a it, it's a blend of memoir and reporting, and it's really beautifully written.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people compared him, I think, to Ryszard Kapuscinski, but without the negative connotations.
Yeah.
And he's South Asian American, and so he also ran into some of the same
Mm.
um, sort of puzzling situations that I did, given the history of South Asians in the region.
Hmm.
And it's absolutely fascinating. Another one is called Coolie Woman by
Mm.
Gayatri Bahadur.
Hmm.
Um, and the subtitle is The Odyssey of Indenture. And in this book, it's very similar to Lose Your Mother.
Hmm.
So she is a descendant of indentured laborers in the Caribbean.
Hmm.
And so in this book, she kind of tries to trace her grandmother's journey from India to Guyana and then her life in Guyana. But she runs into so many historical gaps
Wow.
that she tries to fill. I don't know if she would call her method critical fabulation, but
Yeah.
somewhat
Interesting.
like that.
Yeah.
But she also uses it. She also, like Saidiya Hartman, she also um, provides a lot of context on, why was this journey even necessary and what were the conditions that shaped her grandmother's life and her descendants' life. And
Mm.
a lot of that, of course, went back to the British Empire. And then the last one, somewhat similar in vein, is called Imperial Intimacies
Hmm.
by Hazel V. Carby.
Hmm.
Um, I think it might have been Saidiya Hartman who recommended this on some platform, but it's a wonderful book. Carby is also a historian, and she is the descendant of a Jamaican father and a British mother.
Hmm.
And in this book, she traces both of their lives and how their lives came to be entangled by empire. Like, how did a Jamaican come to
Hmm.
marry a British woman? What were the circumstances surrounding that? What were their lives like? And she goes back also several generations to, her father's family and her mother's family. And again, it's like deeply researched, but also like beautifully and lyrically
Wow.
written. Yeah.
These are amazing book recommendations. Thank you so much. I actually, these are not books I had read, and so now I have more to add to my list, and I will also add them when I post this. But these all sound incredible, just the range and it's so interesting to just to know where writers also get their inspiration from, and
Mm.
sometimes, it leads other writers to these books as well. And so thank you so much, Raksha. I'm excited for your book project. I cannot wait to see it in the world. I know you have you're itching to get back into doing some freelance pieces, and I'm sure you will soon. But just thank you so much for doing this and sharing your process with us.
Oh, thank you. This was so fun. There's nothing better than geeking out with another writer.
I know it is so fun.